I came back late Sunday afternoon, sun low, truck dusty, the kind of quiet you only get after a long weekend away, and I remember thinking something fell off before I even turned into the driveway, like the land itself was holding its breath. Then I saw it. Or I guess, what wasn't there anymore. My greenhouse gone. Not damaged, not half-standing, not reparable, just gone. Flattened like it had never existed. For a second my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe I parked at the wrong entrance, maybe I took the wrong road. But no, that old oak tree was still there, the fence line still crooked in the same spots, and right where the greenhouse should have been, just wreckage. Shattered glass scattered across the soil like frost, metal ribs twisted up out of the dirt like broken bones, irrigation lines ripped open and bleeding mud. 15 years, wiped out in what, a couple hours? I stepped out of the truck and just stood there, not moving, not breathing right, because that place wasn't just some hobby project. I built that greenhouse with my wife back when we were still figuring life out, back when money was tight and everything we had came from sweat and stubbornness. We grew everything in there, tomatoes, herbs, peppers, even stuff the neighbors would swing by for because grocery prices got stupid. It fed us, it fed them. Hell, it became part of the rhythm of the land, and now it looked like a war zone. Then I saw the note, bright yellow, taped to what used to be a support beam, flapping in the wind like it had something important to say. I walked over, peeled it off, already feeling that slow burn creeping up my spine. Removed per HOA environmental standards. Non-compliant agricultural structure. I actually laughed at first, like a dry, confused laugh, because there was no way they were serious. That greenhouse wasn't even close to their property line. My farm runs about 140 acres, and their little luxury neighborhood barely touches one edge of it. And even then, there's a full legal buffer zone. So I read it again, and then it hit me. Not a mistake. Not confusion. They did this on purpose. See, a couple months back, I got a letter, same HOA, complaining that sunlight reflecting off my greenhouse glass was creating a visual disturbance for their homeowners. Visual disturbance, like my tomatoes were somehow blinding their golf carts or something. I ignored it, because frankly it was ridiculous, and legally they had zero authority over anything on my land. Or at least, that's what I thought. Turns out, they didn't need authority, they just needed arrogance. They sent a crew out while I was gone, heavy equipment, full demolition, no notice, no permit on my end, nothing. They just showed up and tore it down like it was abandoned junk. And here's the part that really gets interesting, what they didn't understand, what they didn't even think to check, is that greenhouse wasn't just sitting there growing vegetables. It was built right over the central irrigation hub, the one system that supplies water pressure across this entire section of land, including their neighborhood. Yeah, those pristine fountains at the entrance, the artificial ponds they brag about, the perfectly green golf course lawns, they don't run on magic. That water comes from a pump system on my property, my land, my equipment, my keys. I stood there holding that stupid yellow notice, wind picking up, dirt shifting under my boots, and something just clicked. Not anger exactly. Not yet, more like clarity. They thought they could step onto my land, destroy something I built, and walk away like it was paperwork. They thought because they had money, lawyers, and matching mailboxes that the rules bent around them. I folded the notice, put it in my pocket real slow, then turned and walked straight to the pump house. No rushing, no yelling, just calm. The kind of calm that usually comes right before something breaks. The pump house sits about a quarter-mile off, tucked behind a line of old fencing, and when I got there everything looked normal, machines humming, pressure steady, water moving through the system like it always had. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and just stood there for a moment listening to it. Years of routine, of keeping things running, of making sure not just my land but everything connected to it stayed alive. Then I reached over and shut the main valve. The sound changed immediately, pressure dropped, pipes groaned. The steady hum turned into something hollow. I cut the backup system too, locked the control panel, and stepped back outside, closing the door behind me like nothing had happened. No announcement, no warning, just silence. By the time I got back to the house, I could already see it starting. Their fountains, those big decorative ones right at the entrance, started sputtering, water jets weakening, then collapsing into sad little dribbles before stopping completely. It didn't take long. Water systems like that, They don't have much patience when you cut them off at the source. I leaned against the porch railing, watching the distance, and for the first time since I got home, I smiled. Not because I enjoyed it, but because for once, the balance shifted. By the next morning, things escalated fast. Their ponds, those fake little lakes they advertise in brochures, started shrinking, edges turning into thick mud, fish gasping at the surface. The golf course? That perfect, emerald green carpet? It began to dull, patches turning yellow, then brown, like the life was being pulled straight out of it. And the wind, man. The wind picked the perfect week to show up. Without moisture holding the soil down, dust started lifting, first in little swirls, then full-on sheets blowing across their streets, settling on cars, patios, those spotless white fences they're so proud of. You could almost hear the panic building from a distance. And me? I didn't go anywhere. I stayed right there on my porch, watching it unfold like a slow-motion consequence they never saw coming, because they never bothered to ask who actually controlled the ground they built their little paradise on. And that's the thing about people like that. They assume control is something you declare, not something you earn, until one day, someone reminds them, the hard way. Now, before we go any further, let me pause the story for a second, because what happened here isn't just drama. There's a whole layer of legal and psychological nonsense underneath it that people don't usually talk about. According to standard procedure, an HOA, or homeowners association, only has authority over properties that are explicitly part of their jurisdiction, meaning you signed into it when you bought the property. They can regulate paint colors, lawn height, even what kind of mailbox you install. But stepping onto someone else's land and demolishing a structure? That's not just overreach. That's trespassing, destruction of property, and potentially a civil lawsuit waiting to happen. From a legal perspective, what they did crosses into serious liability territory, especially if that structure had economic value, which, in this case, it clearly did. Now here's where it gets interesting on the human side. This is a psychological trap a lot of these boards fall into. They operate in controlled environments where people comply, so over time they start believing their authority is universal. It's not about the greenhouse, not really. It's about control, image, and the illusion that nothing exists outside their rules. And when someone doesn't play along, they escalate, thinking pressure will fix it. The problem is, they pushed on the wrong system, literally and figuratively. By day 2, the complaints weren't quiet anymore. They were loud, scattered, desperate. You could hear it in the distance, car doors slamming, voices carrying across the dry air, the kind of restless movement that tells you a system is breaking and nobody knows how to fix it. I drove out toward the edge of my property that afternoon, not crossing into their neighborhood, just close enough to see. And yeah, it was bad. The ponds had shrunk into thick, cracked bowls of mud. That polished mirror surface they used to brag about now looked like something abandoned. The fountains were completely dead, just empty stone basins collecting dust. And that golf course, man, that golf course looked like it aged 10 years overnight. Patches of brown spreading like a disease, grass curling in on itself, sprinklers twitching uselessly with no pressure behind them. And the dust. This is the part they really weren't prepared for. The dust didn't just sit still. It moved. It rolled through their streets in waves, coating everything, cars, patios, windows, those perfect little sidewalks. It got into everything. By the time I got back home, I had a pretty good idea what was coming next, and right on schedule, it did. Late afternoon, I hear an engine coming up the long dirt road to my gate. Not slow, not polite, fast, aggressive, like whoever's driving thinks speed equals authority. A black SUV pulls up hard, dust kicking up behind it. Door swings open and out steps this guy. Mid-50s, clean cut, expensive polo that probably cost more than my boots. Sunglasses still on like he's trying to keep control of the situation just by looking the part. I didn't need an introduction. I already knew. This was the HOA president. Except in this version of the story, let's call him Victor Hale. He marches up to the gate, doesn't even wait for me to say anything, just starts in. You shut off the water. Not a question, an accusation. I leaned against the post, arms crossed, calm as ever. Looks that way. He pulls off the sunglasses then, like now it's serious, like eye contact is going to fix what's happening behind him. You can't do this, he says, voice tight. Already irritated but trying to keep it together. You're damaging private property. You're affecting hundreds of homeowners. This is going to cost millions. I let that sit for a second, just long enough for him to hear the wind pushing dust across his own neighborhood behind him. Then I shrugged. Yeah, funny how that works. He didn't like that. Not one bit. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his whole posture shifted from authority to frustration. We had the right to remove that structure, he snapped. It was a hazard. It violated environmental standards. I cut him off right there, not raising my voice, just firm. On my land. That pause, that little hesitation, that's when it hit him. Not fully, not yet, but enough to crack the surface. He tried to pivot, tried to reframe it. There are visual impact clauses, shared environmental considerations. I shook my head, almost smiling now. You sent a crew onto my property, destroyed a structure I built, and didn't even bother checking what it was connected to. Silence. Just wind and dust. And that's when I said it. Real simple. You should have asked. He didn't have a comeback for that. Instead, he switched tactics. Threats. We have attorneys, he said, stepping closer to the gate. We can file emergency injunctions, force restoration of services. I actually laughed at that. Not loud. Just enough to make the point. Already filed my own report, I said, tapping my pocket where that yellow notice still sat folded. Trespassing, destruction of property, loss of agricultural income. You're going to want those attorneys ready. That's when the balance shifted. You could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a situation he could just manage with paperwork and meetings. This was outside his system. He looked back over his shoulder at the neighborhood, probably seeing what I'd already seen, the dust, the damage, the beginnings of panic. And for the first time since he showed up, he didn't look in control. What do you want? He asked finally, quieter now, less edge, more calculation. And that right there, that's the moment everything changes. Because once someone asks that question, they've already accepted they don't have the upper hand anymore. I didn't answer right away. Let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. Then I said, not today. His expression tightened again, confused, irritated, but before he could push further, I turned and walked back toward the house. Conversation over. No negotiation. Not yet. By day 3, chaos. Full chaos. News crews started showing up, not big national outlets, but local stations, enough to make it public. Someone had leaked photos. Maybe me, maybe not. And suddenly their pristine little community was all over the screen looking like a drought zone. Headlines talking about infrastructure failure, environmental mismanagement, community dispute. All those carefully crafted images they spent years building gone. Residents weren't quiet anymore either. Complaints turned into meetings. Meetings turned into shouting matches. People demanding answers from the board, from Victor, from anyone who looked like they had authority. Insurance companies got involved too. That's when things really get messy, because now it's not just inconvenience, it's financial exposure. Damaged landscaping, property value drops, potential claims stacking up, all tied back to one decision. Tear down a greenhouse. By day 4, they came back. Not just Victor this time. A small group, board members, legal representation, all dressed sharp, but looking tired, like they hadn't slept since this started. They didn't come in fast this time, no aggressive driving, no dramatic exits. Just slow, measured steps up to the gate. I walked out to meet them, same as before, same calm. Victor spoke first, but his tone had changed completely. We're prepared to resolve this, he said, choosing his words carefully now. I nodded once. Good. He glanced at the others, then back at me. We will rebuild the structure. I tilted my head slightly. Not enough. One of the lawyers stepped forward, tried to smooth things over. We're also prepared to offer financial compensation for your losses. I cut in again. Not enough. You could feel the tension spike right there. They weren't used to hearing that. They were used to negotiation, compromise, numbers moving around until everyone signs and walks away. But this wasn't that. This wasn't about settling. This was about correction. Victor exhaled slowly, then asked again, what are your terms? And this time, I answered. You rebuild the greenhouse, I said. Twice the size, better materials, full cost on you. They nodded quickly, almost relieved to have something concrete. You compensate every crop lost, projected yield included. Another nod, tighter this time. Then I added the part they weren't expecting. And you sign a binding agreement. Water access isn't free anymore. Monthly compensation. Long term. That one landed heavy. You could see it ripple through the group, the realization that this wasn't a one-time fix, this was permanent. One of them started to object, something about precedent, about fairness, about community agreements, but Victor raised a hand and stopped him. He knew. He understood the position they were in. Done, he said, just like that. But I wasn't finished. I looked past them, out toward the neighborhood, dust still moving through the streets, the damage still visible. And I said, "You'll get the water back when it's done." That part hurt them more than anything else, because now they had to sit in it, live in it, own it. And they did. For 2 full weeks, that neighborhood stayed dry. They brought in water trucks, spent money trying to stabilize soil, dealt with nonstop complaints, pressure from residents, internal fights, all while construction crews worked on my new greenhouse, bigger, stronger, exactly as specified. I checked the progress every day, not because I didn't trust them, but because this time, it was going to be done right. And when it was finally finished, when the glass was set, the structure solid, the systems reconnected, I walked back to the pump house. Same door, same controls, same quiet hum waiting behind it. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and just stood there for a second, remembering what used to be there, what they destroyed, what it cost to bring it back. Then I reached over and turned the system back on. Pressure surged through the pipes. The hum returned, stronger this time. And out in the distance, you could almost imagine the fountains coming back to life, the water flowing again, the dust settling. Balance restored, but not the way it was before. Because this time, they understood exactly where that balance came from. And they never forgot it. So yeah, that's how it ended. Or at least, that's how that chapter ended. Because the truth is, situations like this don't really end. They just shift into a new kind of balance. One where everybody suddenly remembers the rules they ignored before. And if you're listening to this thinking, man, that escalated fast, you're not wrong, but it didn't start fast. That's the part people miss. These kinds of conflicts, they build quietly. One complaint letter, one ignored boundary, one assumption that this won't be a big deal. And then suddenly you're standing in the middle of something way bigger than you planned for. The lesson here is control isn't about who has the nicer houses or the better lawyers or the louder voice in a meeting. It's about who actually understands the system they're standing on. Those folks in that neighborhood, they thought control came from authority, from titles, from a board vote. But they never stopped to ask where their resources came from, who maintained them, who had the ability to shut them off. And that's not just a legal mistake, that's a mindset problem. Because once you start believing your influence is absolute, you stop checking your assumptions, and that's when you make decisions that come back around hard. From a legal perspective, what happened here is a textbook example of overreach meeting consequence. They stepped outside their jurisdiction, acted without proper verification, and caused measurable damage, financial, operational, reputational. And once that line is crossed, it's not just about fixing the mistake, it's about paying for it, sometimes long after the original decision is forgotten. But beyond the legal side, there's something more human going on here. This is a psychological trap a lot of structured communities fall into. They operate in environments where compliance is normal, where people follow the rules because that's the agreement they signed. Over time, that creates a kind of echo chamber, where authority feels bigger than it actually is, and when someone outside that system doesn't respond the way they expect, it feels like defiance instead of reality. So they push harder. They escalate. They assume pressure will solve the problem, without realizing they're pushing against something they don't control. And that's where things break. Now, let me be clear. This isn't about glorifying revenge. It might sound satisfying, sure, watching a system collapse after it oversteps, but what really matters here is understanding the mechanics behind it. Boundaries matter. Ownership matters. Communication matters. If someone had taken 5 minutes to knock on a door, ask a question, verify a connection, none of this would have happened. No lawsuits, no dust storms, no public embarrassment. Just a conversation. But arrogance has a way of skipping that step. It tells you already know enough, that your authority covers the situation, that asking questions is optional. And that's where the damage starts. The lesson here is, never assume control over something you didn't build, don't maintain, and don't fully understand. Whether it's land, infrastructure, or even relationships, if you treat it like it's yours without respecting the boundaries around it, eventually something's going to push back. And when it does, it's usually not subtle. What I find interesting, and honestly a little ironic, is how quickly the tone changed once consequences showed up. Same people, same situation, but suddenly there's negotiation, cooperation, respect. Not because they discovered new values overnight, but because the cost of ignoring those values became real. And that's human nature, for better or worse. We tend to respect boundaries more when crossing them becomes expensive. So if you're watching this from the outside, maybe dealing with your own HOA, or a neighbor, or any kind of authority structure that feels a little too comfortable stepping over the line, don't just react. Understand the system. Know your rights. Know your leverage. Know what's actually enforceable and what's just noise dressed up as rules. Because once you understand that, you don't need to escalate blindly. You can respond strategically, and sometimes just knowing where the real control sits is enough to prevent the situation from ever getting this far. Or if it does get that far, you'll know exactly how to handle it. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have shut the system down immediately or try to work it out first? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA pushing boundaries like this, I want to hear about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's compare notes, because these stories, they're more common than people think. And if you want more breakdowns like this, real stories, real consequences, and the hidden rules behind them, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around, because trust me, this isn't the only time someone learned the hard way that control isn't always where you think it is.